Oh, Bindu, we got you. All right. Looks like the recording has started. Great. So for a little bit of background on the administrative guidelines and how they came about, the Affordable Housing Preservation Policy was adopted in March of this year with the goal of one-for-one replacement of affordable units that are being redeveloped. These were born out of the Affordable Housing Preservation Task Force, and they culminated in a set of recommendations. I think there are about 25 of them for different strategies for preserving existing affordable housing. They're like financial, land use recommendations, legislative activities, all to help the county preserve existing affordable housing. So the policy was a comprehensive plan amendment that we got adopted this year. And the administrative guidelines are a separate board-approved document and provide additional details that may not necessarily be laid out in the comprehensive plan itself. So we do currently have a set of administrative guidelines that we use for our workforce dwelling unit policy, which covers how that policy is implemented, including the commitment of units, compliance with affordability, and other processes. The administrative guidelines for preservation will operate similarly to that document. And our draft document clarifies the applicability of the policy to multifamily properties proposed to redevelop, how that policy will fit into the existing review process for rezoning applications, as well as the goals for the replacement units, the administration of those units, and development of relocation plans for existing tenants. So in this presentation, I'll cover those topics and I'll go through each and kind of step back and see if anyone has any feedback on them. So feel free to jump in and ask questions or make comments. And to get to our draft document, which I included in the chat, the link leads to that. We utilized feedback that we got in the extensive outreach that we did for the comprehensive plan amendment itself. And then we did have some preliminary comments from members of industry and the Board of Supervisors as well. So the first topic in the administrative guidelines is the determination of policy applicability. As early on as possible in the process, HCD would determine if the policy applies to a project. So committed units that would qualify for the policy are affordable to households earning 80% of the area median income and below, either currently or whose commitments have expired within the previous 12 months. And those affordability commitments might be done through the affordable dwelling unit or workforce dwelling unit programs. They might have used tax credits or have those rent restrictions through other means. And then qualified market affordable units are those that are affordable to households earning 60% of the area median income and below. We will look at rents over the course of the preceding 3 years to determine if the property was market affordable for a majority of that time. And another factor that we're looking at is if the property has appeared on one or more of the past 2 market affordable surveys that we conduct every 2 years. So just for a little background on that, that's also a preservation recommendation that came out of that document, which kind of directed HCD to every other year conduct an affordability analysis in the county and see what market rate units are renting at below 60%, at or below 60% of the area median income. We have a new stipulation in the draft document that where properties that have market rents up to 80% may also opt into the policy, which can give them the benefit of additional density and can provide the county with additional affordable units that would not otherwise have been captured in the policy. So this gives an option to preserve more workforce housing at higher levels of affordability, which are still very critical to providing housing for all income levels. The topic of workforce housing and its preservation was relayed to us at the public hearing for the plan amendment back in March. So our goal with this opt-in is to provide a tool for preserving units at higher AMI levels. So the next topic is applicability determination. Property owners may request an affordability assessment from HCD at any time, and if they plan on submitting a rezoning application, they'll ideally come to us prior to any pre-submission meetings so we can get this worked out as early as possible. HCD will determine if the policy will apply to the redeveloping property as I described in the last slide. And the determination will also include the replacement goals for the units, which have a comparable number of units, as well as AMI levels and number of bedrooms to what is being replaced. So I want to step back and see if anyone has any thoughts on the applicability itself. I know that was it was kind of a hot topic during the comprehensive plan amendment. So that was definitely something that was relayed to us that needed to be clarified in the administrative guidelines. So feel free to jump in if you have any questions or comments.
Hi, Bree. It's Brian Winterhalter. I have a question about the affordability assessment.
Sure.
Is there an anticipated time frame that would be provided back to an applicant or property owner who requests an assessment or a determination?
That's a good question. We don't have that laid out currently, but I think that's been brought up before. So we'll definitely take that down and look at that as something, as seeing if we can provide some kind of time frame that can be expected within.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful if it's,
Mhm.
whatever is appropriate and reasonable, but if it's 30 days or 60 days or whatever it is, I think it would be helpful to give owners and applicants some sense of how long it would take and when they should ask for that determination.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments on applicability? We have time at the end too. So, Bindi, were you going to go? Thought I saw you light up for a sec. Okay, I'll move forward.
No, I'm good, thanks.
Okay. It lights up when someone is starting to talk, so I was looking for that. Okay, so the second topic in the guidelines is the review process for proposals prior to a rezoning application being submitted. After that affordability assessment that I described is completed, the applicant will submit a preservation proposal for HCD and DPD to review. This will include the density needed to achieve one-for-one replacement based on the affordability assessment. It should also include any alternatives that are being proposed if they're necessary. HCD and DPD may request additional information, which can include massing concepts, which would help give us an idea of how that needed additional density may affect the site, and also potentially a financial feasibility model that shows the justifications for any alternatives to one-for-one replacement. And the additional information is definitely something we've discussed with industry in the past, as they typically don't provide financial feasibility information to the county in the review process for rezonings. So that's really something. If you have feedback on that, I would love to hear it. We're trying to get an understanding of what's appropriate for us to expect that can help us understand the information that we need to justify the alternatives to one-for-one replacement. So any questions on the review process?
Bree, a quick question. What kind of alternatives are you thinking of? Like, what is your thought process on that one?
By that, we essentially mean anything less than one-for-one replacement. They provide us with what they need to get to one-for-one replacement in terms of density, but then also an alternative proposal, which can include less with a certain amount of density that helps make up for it. I think we clarified in the policy itself that we understand that the one-for-one replacement may not always be feasible, but we're not letting perfect be the enemy of good. So we are definitely willing to examine those alternatives. Does that make sense?
Got it. Thank you.
And Bree, could I add as well?
Yeah.
Just to kind of add on to what you were saying. When we had done a rough analysis of looking at a few different properties, some of them that might have 100% market affordable may need a lot of density to offset the preservation of those units. And in some places that might be fine, but in other places that, there may be, it may be not appropriate to look at redevelopment to that level of density. So I think we still want to have the conversation, and we still want to see if there's a way to, try to get to the one-for-one with, maybe less density or somewhere close to the one-for-one with less density. So we're open to having that conversation, but just to kind of put a little bit of a finer grain on it, the alternatives would allow for that type of conversation to happen. That we recognize that there may be a lot of density needed, and that may not be appropriate, and we may have to scale back on that. So there's kind of that push-pull, and we want to make sure we have that room to have that type of conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. That's exactly, some of our analyses showed just situations that wouldn't be viable for the one-for-one replacement. Like we know we can't likely do 2000% density bonus. So it's we understand the realities of the situation. Okay.
Yeah, this gets a little bit, give and take. So it's not a fine science, of course.
Yeah, it's that, we're trying to be flexible and understanding of the nuances of the situation. So I think that's what we're, trying to achieve here in the kind of examining what would be needed and then what's an alternative and why.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bindu. So the third topic in the guidelines includes the goals for replacement units. The goal of the policy is ultimately to maintain affordability and minimize displacement of residents. So for replacement units, we are ultimately seeking to obtain the same number of units with comparable affordability levels and number of bedrooms. We do also want to be able to meet the needs of existing residents who would want to return to the redeveloped property. There may be tenants that are underhoused, which means that there is not enough space for the occupants of that unit. They may be underhoused due to not being able to afford that unit alone or as a family. And that's something we did hear from members of the public, that often those units we deem affordable might actually take multiple families to afford to live there. So we do feel that the needs of existing residents should be evaluated while developing the goals for replacement units. This was raised by housing advocates and residents during public outreach for the amendment itself. So we are definitely looking to balance the affordability goals with what the needs actually are at the property. And we are also currently drafting language to add regarding the provision of units offsite. The goals of offsite units would be ultimately to retain that affordability while also offering proximity to the current site and comparable accessibility and amenities. We are considering factors to guide the provision of offsite units, including being within a 1 mile radius of the site and having comparable access to transportation, which can include transit, major roadways, and maybe pedestrian and biking facilities, as well as schools and public facilities and commercial and employment centers. Does anyone have any thoughts on the offsite units or my last slide on replacement unit goals? They kind of go hand in hand. The preserving units offsite, it's not in the draft currently, but it's something that's been brought to our attention. So we did want to make sure we could try and get some feedback on that if possible. So if we're missing anything or shouldn't be including certain things, then that would be great to hear about.
I
Jenny.
just had a question, Bree.
Yeah.
So when you were speaking of the multiple families, the underhoused, is the goal to get these families into their own unit if they're coming back into the space or a
Yeah,
more
I think
affordable unit?
we'd be looking at understanding, what those needs are, if possible, at that site, and figuring out if there is a way to get to housing those two families separately in their own units at appropriate affordability levels. But we do understand that we have to balance that with, matching what's on the site and kind of pull that into the assessment of how much density is needed. But it's definitely something we want to consider because, we did hear that from residents that like, hey, we can barely afford where we live, and we only can afford where we live because we're living with other people. So it yeah, we're going to try and balance those out. But I mean, ideally we could meet the needs of the residents as well.
Great, thanks.
Move along. So the fourth topic is the administration of the preserved units after the zoning process is complete. If the units are not already subject to administration processes for another state, local, or federal program, which can mean that they have utilized tax credits, that would be a state program that they'd be subject to those administration processes. So if they're not subject to any other process, then the units would be administered using the Workforce Dwelling Unit Administrative Guidelines. So this would apply to processes including offering agreements and covenants, compliance, and the integration and dispersion of units, as well as unit sizing. So it really takes care of after those after they go through the zoning case, what they look like at their site plan when they're dispersing the units, and then how those developers come to us to ensure that those units are affordable. And the benefit of this mechanism is that we would have units committed through redevelopment being processed in a similar manner. And if something changes in the WDU guidelines, then those changes would automatically apply to preservation as well, which is very efficient for us and can minimize confusion. So the last topic in the guidelines is relocation assistance plans. So when we were doing plan outreach for the plan amendment, we heard concern from the public about relocation of existing tenants during redevelopment. So we are proposing that a relocation assistance plan be provided to HCD for review and approval during the entitlement process and should be crafted using the Fairfax County relocation guidelines. The guidelines provide a framework for effective relocation plans and recommends elements that should be included in that. The plans should aim to minimize displacement of tenants and provide strategies for relocating them when it's necessary. As one of our next initiatives, we are looking to update those relocation guidelines as well. The board has expressed a lot of interest in this, especially during our housing committee meeting last month that we spoke to them about these guidelines at. And they asked us to begin work on that. And so we'll be looking for, there will be more information on that forthcoming. And does anyone have any specific questions or comments on relocation or administration, especially through the WDU guidelines?
It's Brian again.
Hey, Brian.
With respect to the administration under the WDU guidelines,
Mhm.
I guess I'm making the assumption, but correct me if I'm wrong, that if an owner, an applicant for additional development on a property that includes a portion of existing units that are to be preserved, those existing units to be preserved in accordance with the preservation policy and administered under the WDU guidelines, those are allowed to remain in their existing condition, right? Like they don't need to be retrofitted to meet WDU guidelines for like the sizes of the units and mix of units compared to the new development and that kind of stuff. How would that work?
Oh, so you're talking about if you're physically preserving some units, like
Yeah.
if you're doing an infill project.
Yeah, like what if your preservation strategy is to preserve some building and maybe renovate the building, but keep all the units in the same configuration and then build some amount of new development, and that could have a component of affordable units or it could have a component of market rate units, but overall part of your strategy is to preserve affordable units by keeping a certain amount of the units on site as they exist.
Okay, yeah, because the unit sizing would definitely be, a problem if you're physically preserving. I think, we understand that maybe not every single item will apply from the WDU guidelines to every situation for preservation, but that's a very interesting situation that honestly I had not thought of. So I'm glad you brought it up, and I think we might have to figure out how to account for that. I do believe we have some language in the guidelines that does state, or it does allow for some kind of alternatives to either the guidelines and maybe we need to add that to the use of the WD guidelines as well, unless we already have that now. But I know that's a really good point though.
Yeah, and I think I saw a reference in the guideline draft
Yeah.
to that alternative,
Mhm.
flexibility, which I think is fine. I'm just thinking when obviously it would be challenging to be in a situation where the goal is to preserve some amount of existing units and that's somehow not feasible under the policy.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic point. I think, you've brought to light a real life situation where we might need one of those alternatives, especially in pertaining to unit sizing and integration and dispersion. So that's part of the trickiness of preservation, that it can come in multiple forms, use preservation or physical preservation. So that's a great point. Thank you. Because
Sure,
obviously you
thanks.
can't change the unit size.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we would not expect unit sizing to be changed where it cannot be changed. So thank you for that. Any other questions or comments on administration or relocation? So for our anticipated timeline, last month we sought out preliminary feedback from industry on the proposed draft. We also presented to the Board of Supervisors at their Housing Committee and sought feedback from them as well. And then we published our draft guidelines on June 1st, and we are collecting feedback through the website through June 30th. And there is a public comment form on the website if you haven't seen it already, which I put into the chat earlier. And you can also email me directly. What I will say about our public comment form is it is an email that comes to me. So feel free to email me and reach out as well. So we're really hoping that the guidelines makes our expectation clear for the process. And I know, we've added some new bits, such as the inclusion of the ability to opt into the policy to preserve additional market rate units up to 80% of the AMI. So we love feedback on all these topics, including the new things that maybe you haven't seen yet, like that opt-in policy. And if anyone has any additional comments or feedback on the topics, now that we've gone through everything, if you have any questions or comments on the applicability, affordability determinations, review process, anything like that, I'm happy to go back to any slides as well if you need me to. Oh, and I think you all can click through on Teams, which is a feature I recently became aware of, which is pretty cool.
I just figured that out too.
I know, right? It's very handy, especially when you do the presentation directly in there instead of sharing a screen. It's pretty cool. Any anything I can go over again or clarify for anyone?
So Bree, I'm just a little confused, Bree, still on the
Sure.
relocation assistance plan.
Okay.
That's still a little bit, yeah, like how's, and I don't know what is, I don't know, I didn't look this up before and I should have. What does Fairfax County have now versus what you guys are going to do? What is your plan to look at this in more detail?
So I'm going to put our relocation guidelines in the chat. We currently have those guidelines that help formulate relocation assistance plans. So each development during the entitlement process will need to do a relocation assistance plan that will approve within that process. So we understand that the needs will be different on every site. So they are going to differ from site to site, but those relocation guidelines do help guide the formation of relocation assistance plans. It really goes over like what should be thought about, what should be provided for, and really how to formulate those in a way that does minimize that displacement or really provides for people if they do need to relocate. So it's every single development will do a relocation assistance plan using the Fairfax County relocation guidelines. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think I'm going to look at these guidelines a little bit because I haven't looked at them in detail. I apologize. I'm not prepared.
No. It's good to ask the question, I think, because, we're talking about a relocation assistance plan and then relocation guidelines. So that's two different documents. So I totally get it. I think reading through them might help. I think they're laid out pretty clearly. And although the document is a bit out of date, as I mentioned, we're looking to update it. It's still a really good document if you don't know a lot about relocation. So I think it's pretty comprehensive.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think that should be helpful. Is there anything else I can go back to? Okay. Well, my child just walked in.
Bree, Bree, can I
Go ahead.
Can I just ask, I don't think we've heard anything about offsite units. Would you go back to the slide 7, I think it is, and I'd be interested to hear if hi Isla, um, if we have any comments or thoughts from the group about the offsite potential for preserving units, and these criteria that we're looking at, and if anyone had any thoughts on that. So you'd potentially be able to look at preserving existing affordable units offsite as long as it's within a mile of the redevelopment project, and as long as it has these comparable factors about transportation and transit access, schools, public facilities, libraries, things like that, like access to that, proximity to commercial employment centers. I'd be interested if anyone has any thoughts on that.
Megan, this has been, how do you envision something like that being implemented? Just because I don't think I don't think I personally have any issues with that, but I'm just, would there be some kind of conditions or covenants placed on, you know, the units, the offsite ones, or?
Yeah, that's what we're envisioning. I think it'll be really tricky. To be honest, I'm not sure how often it'll be done, because it would involve coordination between, you know, two property owners likely, or, you know, potentially if maybe the property owner has multiple sites. So I don't know that I'm envisioning a lot of this. But we do have the example, there's an offsite allowance for workforce dwelling units in Tyson's, and we know Capital One is putting units into the Somos development. So we have, you know, we do have one example at least of where offsite has taken place. I think it is a bit unique because you have Somos is that fully affordable versus an existing affordable unit. But you know, I think as we look at this, we would need to put covenants onto the second property so that those did have that same level of commitment.
Yeah, and I think the Somos example is a good one because, you know, it might be easier to, well, I agree with Megan that I don't know how often this is going to be done. If it is a situation where there are a lot of units to preserve and someone's willing to maybe go through the tax credit process to preserve units, doing so in its own building, I think would be a lot easier. So there could be use for it. It's good to have that flexibility in there to allow for that if needed. But yeah, I agree that I'm not sure how often it's going to be used.
In the Somos building example, though, that's a new building being built.
That's right.
That's accommodating WDUs that would have been provided elsewhere with part of the development, right? Other development. So
That's right.
If there is a site that is market affordable that the owner would like to redevelop, then under this offsite portion of the policy, there could be essentially some level of coordination to happen to have affordable units provided in basically another development like that example. That seems like it's pretty straightforward. I mean, there'd be a lot of coordination. It'd be somewhat complicated in the implementation, but conceptually it seems pretty straightforward. I'm thinking of the other example though, is are you intending with this policy to allow existing market rate affordable units to be made by covenant or otherwise committed affordable units to satisfy a preservation requirement for a development on a different site? Because the thing that occurs to me, and I haven't thought about this in detail, so forgive me, but the thing that occurs to me is if you're developing one site and you're preserving units on another site, then you don't have a place for the people who are living at the site where the units are being redeveloped in terms of a relocation plan. Does that make sense?
You mean if on the off, people are living in the offsite units, so you can't replace them with the people from the site
Right,
in
exactly.
question? Yeah.
Like how would that work from the perspective of, you know, you're maintaining the number of offsite, or you're maintaining the number of affordable units that are now committed where they weren't committed before,
Mhm.
but you're redeveloping the units on one site and the
Yeah.
other units are already occupied.
Yeah, yeah. Brian, you're so good at thinking of specific situations that we need to
I
think through.
know,
It's like your talent in this.
Yeah,
But it is a
yeah.
really,
I'm not sure if
really
it's a
good.
talent or a curse, but
No, it's good. No, but you bring up a really good point, because that is something that would complicate that. But I think that's, something we're hoping to stay flexible on and figure out the best mechanism to get units, and preserve affordability. So, maybe providing for those existing tenants is something that's in the relocation plan, and maybe something can be worked out with the new units, or maybe not. But I think that's definitely a good situation to think through.
and by the way, I think it's a good concept to have in some way in the policy. I think more flexibility is certainly better than not, and to figure out a way to implement it is obviously important, but I think it's a good concept. And I think, people thought there might never be something like the Somos building that, in a way is taking units from other sites. I think
Mhm.
people thought at one point there would never be sort of trading of athletic fields that are required in Tyson's, and now that's happened. So,
Yeah.
it seems like even though we feel like it might be unlikely now, it's probably something that may end up happening in some specific scenario down the road. So it's probably a good idea to think about how to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that was part of our hope with staying flexible in the policy itself. And then we're trying to drill down more in the administrative guidelines, but there are these items that we do need to keep a little bit flexible. So understanding that all these situations are different, and we could have a situation like that where that becomes a little complicated. So yeah, it's definitely good to think about. Okay. Anything else I can clarify, or any comments on any other slides or topics? All right. Well, thank you all so much. This little group tonight was a great discussion, and I really appreciate you all coming out. Please feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the chat, so you can easily click on it. And then there's a QR code there too to our website. So I hope everyone has a great evening, and please give me comments through June 30th. Thank
All right,
you.
will do. Thank you guys for doing this. Appreciate it.
Bye,
Have a good night.
everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.